two, one, two, three.
Hello and welcome to Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. I'm here today with Michael Demo. He's the chair of the Labor Committee of Ithaca DSA, and he is going to be bringing us news from some of the unions of Tompkins County. Michael, you said you had a few general statistics. Perhaps you could give them.
In Tompkins County, we have about 50,000 workers. Of them, about half earn less than a living wage. The county is about 20% unionized, which that's just kind of an estimate. There's no real formal census of that, but that would be about double of the nation in general. That's typical for communities like ours, where the biggest employers are in education and in healthcare. So it's not at all surprising that a lot more groups of workers have decided to unionize and are now in the phase of contract negotiations.
I think you said that you wanted to make a note that while you have ongoing relations with labor organizations, you are not affiliated with any except Democratic Socialists of America, which is not a union.
That's right, yeah. And I'm just going to base the information that I share on today, just my perspective coming from stuff like media reporting, press releases from the unions and from management, and NLRB material, documentation, not anything else.
What are the workplaces that you bring us news from?
Well, the first workplace that I wanted to talk about that has had some developments this year is Bang's Ambulance. A lot of people may recognize Bang's Ambulance in the community. I've taken a ride on it on occasion. They actually unionized back in 2022, and they're in contract negotiations right now. And unfortunately, contract negotiations have really dragged on, and they've taken a sour turn more recently. So just some background to that whole experience. Despite the fact that the costs for ambulances are soaring, EMTs and paramedics haven't really seen great increases in their earnings. And in fact, EMTs in New York State are averaging just below the Tompkins County living wage of $25.08 an hour. Anecdotally, it seems to me that Bang's workers aren't all that well compensated. That's just my impression. And working conditions there have been sometimes challenging.
I can imagine challenging working conditions.
Yeah, right. It's a really difficult job in general. And as elsewhere in healthcare, workers at Bangs are fighting for some provisions related to minimum staffing requirements, and also some provisions that would allow them to work slightly fewer hours. Bangs has this, for me, kind of surprising requirement right now for workers, where they have to work 48 hours in order to qualify for benefits. So that includes benefits like medical insurance. Their full-time tier starts at 48 hours. So everybody who works there and is receiving those benefits is working like a 50-hour week, basically, in this really difficult job. That's difficult emotionally, it's really demanding physically, kind of a high-stress job. So it's really understandable that they might want to bring that down.
Do they have a contract? You said
they do not have a contract. So union vote was in 2022, and here we are 4 years later. There's still no contract. Bang's management has told a story about that, which includes they cite no-show meetings, meetings with no-shows on the part of union representation, and also late scheduling and inconsistent scheduling. I will say, as an aside, it's always really hard to schedule these sorts of negotiations. Oftentimes, a lot of people have to be present. Oftentimes, it's people who are coming from out of town, and certainly, it probably doesn't make it any easier that a lot of the workers involved have such intense schedules, working those 50-hour weeks that I just talked about. But the union has cited its own concerns on the part of management. So They were very close to a contract this spring. On March 24th, CSEA 718 reps, that's the union representing Bangs Ambulance, as well as the Bangs Board of Directors and councils for both sides, had an agreement that no further changes would occur to the contract. They were only looking for some, technical errors that they would resolve, and they agreed to sign the contract by the 7th of April. Well, that didn't happen. The board didn't sign the contract. Instead, the next that they heard from the board was on the 18th when they sought to renegotiate an incentive pay leave of absence policy. So since then, the union issued a new deadline for signing on the 1st of May. That was something they issued on April 29th. That also didn't happen, and the union has filed a unfair labor practice complaint against Bangs through the NLRB. What they were alleging specifically was a refusal to bargain or bad faith bargaining and a failure to sign an agreement. The complaint was later withdrawn with a letter approving the withdrawal request issued by the NLRB on the 28th of May. So the NLRB lists that case as closed. And there's been no public updates since May. So they're still given that within the bargaining process.
You talked about the NLRB. That would be the National Labor Relations Board, a federal agency that is supposed to deal with this kind of matter.
Mm-hmm. And unions and organizing workers have the right to file these sorts of complaints when there is, when management is stepping on worker rights, when there's bad faith negotiating and stuff like that, an unfair labor practice complaint. It does happen from time to time in the course of negotiations. It certainly doesn't paint a pretty picture of management behavior at Bangs.
Is there anything the public can do about this?
Yes, if you go to the union website, it's bawu718.org. There's the opportunity to sign a letter in support of Bangs workers. And they're also asking people to show their support on social media, where they have social media pages for the union as well.
Okay, that was bawu718.org.
That's right, yeah.
Where else is there news in the county?
And Family and Children's, we had a successful unionization drive just this spring. About 30 workers at the facility, mostly clinicians and nurses, intake clinicians, behavioral healthcare coordinators, but also a few other sorts of workers, all unionized together with an overwhelming vote. They had a supermajority of signed cards, but I guess management apparently wasn't interested in voluntary recognition. So they had their NLRB vote in April. It was tallied at the end of April. It was an overwhelming victory for those favoring unionization. And now they're at the point of negotiations to create a new contract.
Okay, so they have been negotiating, but only for a few months.
I think even less time than that in terms of when the negotiations actually started.
That's promising.
Yeah, and it's interesting to note what their demands are there. In the case of the Bangs ambulance workers, we saw some concern about how much workers have to work in order to be considered full-time. They're also concerned about, at Bangs, the modernization of equipment and making sure that minimal staffing requirements are met. And we see some similar things going on at Family and Children's, where the union members are concerned about the workload of healthcare workers. And they're particularly concerned about the pressure to meet demands of insurance companies that they see as in conflict with providing client care. Workers have seen a big increase in recent years in the number of clients and increasing acuity of many clients' concerns. So these growing demands, the union says, puts workers at risk of burnout and compassion fatigue, as well as reduced quality of care. So they just want to see some controls with regards to that.
I think all familiar stories in healthcare circles. And I believe there is another healthcare workplace where things are going on.
Yet another healthcare workplace in Ithaca, and this is also with CWA, Communication Workers of America. CWA, the Communication Workers of America, is at Cayuga Health, formerly known as Cayuga Medical Center. They successfully unionized in January, but as of April, they were not yet in contract negotiations due to delays by Cayuga Medical Center administration. That's at least according to the union. And they actually filed a unfair labor practices complaint with the NLRB, and that case is still listed as open. So this is an ongoing concern.
And I think there were some other concerns that you mentioned.
Well, certainly, yeah. Before unionization happened in January, there was what the union describes as an expensive union busting campaign with outside consultants organized to prevent this unionization vote. Voters ended up voting about 82% in favor of unionization. So this is a bargaining unit of nurses, which includes both full-time, part-time, and per diem registered nurses. There have been over the years a lot of complaints against management of the hospital. Over the years, there have been a lot of complaints actually against management of the hospital. Complaint doesn't necessarily mean that they were doing wrong, but back in 2017, for instance, the NLRB found that the hospital unlawfully fired 2 nurses during a unionization attempt. So to hear the side of the story from the union, this administration at the hospital has a long history of trying to suppress union activity. It's been a struggle for them in contract negotiations, and this charge that they brought in April alleges that Cayuga Medical Center management has unlawfully threatened and surveilled nurses, that they retaliated against a nurse, that they maintained unlawful work rules to prohibit nurses from discussing their union efforts, and that they also bargained in bad faith by refusing to meet with the nurses' bargaining committee at reasonable times. So these are major issues. The charge was amended in May. It's still open and apparently unresolved.
I have a little memory to add. Well, actually, 2 little memories to add, because I was among a crowd, many of them DSA members, who back in winter stood with signs outside the hospital encouraging. Oh, and those signs have been ubiquitous in stores. In other words, business workplaces around Ithaca. I've never seen so many signs. But I also wanted to say that I myself was recently hospitalized for a few days, and one of the nurses was wearing a small union button. So I told her how happy I was to see it.
That's great. Obviously, a community is naturally going to support these frontline healthcare workers who care for our health. I think one of the reasons this case hits home so hard is that, well, if you look at what the nurses are asking for, again, it's a continuation of that pattern that we saw with Bangs and at Family and Children's. Their number one ask that I've seen on press releases from them, also heard at events from them, is they just want safer staffing levels. They're concerned about unsafe workloads for nurses. And to hear them describe these workloads, it's really a lot that they face. They're trying to provide quality care, but they feel that they're not always able to do so given how work is being distributed there and given the staffing levels. They're also seeking changes to break and scheduling policies to make sure that nurses have energy and competence when they're there caring for patients. They are also looking for higher compensation as well as a greater transparency and responsiveness from management. So these are all pretty typical demands.
Yeah, one of the nurses who was working with me, it just seemed that she was there forever on duty.
Yeah, they have very long shifts. They also have reported concerns about not adequate breaks within those shifts. And what I've heard attending a particular meeting of the union, nurses complaining about having lots of patients assigned to them, including difficult patients, and really divides their attention. So they can't necessarily invest all that they'd like to in each patient.
Right. And in my case, observing, it seemed that she was on duty for long hours one day and again the next day. In fact, I was wondering if she'd had a break at all.
One thing that I've heard in general in the healthcare field is that it can be really hard to staff these positions long term. And this is what we heard from the union at Family and Children's, that they're saying, look, we're facing these really high workloads with patients who have very acute needs. We want to make sure that the clinicians in these positions aren't burning out, that they can be here for the long run to serve patients and have relationships and be part of this community long term. And I think that's a concern. You can cite this concern at the hospital as well in the case of these nurses. Hospitals that have better working conditions are going to naturally have an easier time retaining staff and bringing in new staff in a highly competitive environment. So these are demands coming from the union that are in the interest of nurses, but it can have really lots of knock-on benefits for the organization, for our community as a whole, if this hospital is a good place to work and an appealing place to work and has an easier time recruiting in the future.
Yeah, well, to put things in another context, I think I was mentioning to my brother who lives in Massachusetts that there was a union campaign, that our nurses were here at our local hospital were organizing. And he just said, is there such a thing as a hospital without a union? He thought they were organized everywhere.
Yeah, it is really surprising that, I mean, this is a class of 300 nurses. So go back to that statistic of, 50,000 workers in Tompkins County in general. This has a really big impact on the outlook of the whole county in terms of unionization level. So it's tremendous, in my opinion, that they unionized, and hopefully they'll resolve this complaint with management, and maybe management will be a little more efficient in reaching a contract in the future.
Okay, and I guess people should know that in fact they have not reached a contract and those signs are still very relevant. It's
Absolutely, keep the signs up, and also, any support to bring to bangs, or also to the workers at Family and Children's who they haven't been in contract negotiations for a long time now, but they are in negotiations. But I just want to note, just to clarify, the nurses at the hospital aren't yet in contract negotiations. So this complaint and this sort of mess that they've reported has occurred before they formally entered into negotiations.
wow. And there was yet another workplace that you wanted to report about.
Yeah, so we see sort of different shades of what can happen when you unionize. We see in the Bangs workplace, they unionized years ago, and they've been stuck in contract negotiations, and they're citing these difficulties from their interaction with management. We see that Family and Children's, they unionized in the spring, and they very quickly got into contract negotiations. We see with the nurses that they unionized last January, and they're still not in contract negotiations as of the last update that I had available. And they have this complaint with the NLRB of unfair labor practices by management. In the last case here, we have workers with UAW 2300 at Tompkins County Public Library who have been unionized for quite a while now, but they were stuck also in contract negotiations for a number of years. So there's two groups, two bargaining units at the library, both represented by UAW 2300. One of them represents the librarians at the library, and they agreed to a contract late last year. The other is staff. This is support staff like clerks, assistants, support staff like that. And they finally reached a contract in June after years of negotiation. One of the complicating factors there was that there were several different library directors over a period of a few years, including interim directors.
Oh, that's right. We heard of interim directors when a retired director had to come back, had to leave her position on the county legislature and go back to being an interim director at the library.
Hmm. Now we have a new director. So this is a different case than those other cases that I was talking about because they already had a contract which expired in December of 2024. Negotiations began just after that in February of 2025, and they actually did reach an interim agreement last year. The contract they've signed now goes into effect retroactively, and it will expire at the end of 2027. And we see they actually got quite a bit. Not everything they were looking for, but it's a pretty appealing contract in some regards. One of the major landmarks here is that first in an interim agreement and then in the contract, they have all employees of Tompkins County Public Library earning a living wage. So in Tompkins County, that's $25.08 per hour this year. So that's huge. They also have some protections related to AI, an assurance that the library support staff will have a say in the library's annual audits on AI, and provisions to give union staff access to resources if their job is impacted by AI.
How would AI impact a library job, I wonder, in a serious way?
I'm not entirely sure. I didn't read up on that, but boy, it's kind of been insidious in my own career. It creeps into every little corner. So I don't doubt that it might.
Well, your own career is, I believe, going to be teaching, you said.
That's right. Yeah, I'm in a master's program in education right now. The volume of material that is generated by AI related to, say, instructional strategies or anything that you might need to know as a teacher and navigate for, applied knowledge in pedagogy. The whole field is just flooded with AI content, including books and online as well. And a lot of this AI content is really low quality, masquerading as higher quality content. It makes it pretty difficult.
Right. Plus, in a sense, a lot of it is probably, if you looked at it carefully, legally stolen
Yes.
from work done by human beings. Well, some of the unions that you mentioned, no, I guess CSEA in the case of Bang's Ambulance has
Hmm.
been around this county for a while.
Hmm.
I believe mainly representing government workers, local government workers. If it's the same bargaining, if it's the same unit, I'm not sure.
I'm not sure actually myself.
Okay, okay. UAW 2300 is a very familiar union here. They got started back in the early 1980s at Cornell service and maintenance workers. And DSA, Ithaca DSA existed at that time.
Mm.
We're one of the oldest locals and called locals then, chapters now. And we were backing them.
That's great. That's really a seminal unionization drive. And look at the success that they've had. I think, today we're talking about some cases where management has really complicated the contract negotiation process and where they've really added some challenges for unions, making that step. Why are they doing this? Well, because that contract negotiation process is clearly in the interest of the workers and the unions. If you look at the story of UAW 2300 in Ithaca and what it has meant for the thousands of workers at Cornell that it represents, it has really brought them much greater pay and opportunities than they otherwise would have had. So it's been a great success story. And these will also be success stories as much as management may try to kick up some dirt in the meantime.
Well, thank you, Michael Demo, for bringing us up to date on several of the ongoing union struggles in this county. And I hope we will hear from you again in the future. And I hope we will hear some news from, well, I guess at Cayuga Medical Center that at least negotiations have started
Mm.
at um, Bangs, that they have concluded successfully. I guess those
Hopefully,
are,
they were so
yeah,
close.
the toughest cases.
Hmm.
And congratulations to Tompkins County Public Library.
It really shows what's possible through unionization and through these hard efforts over a long period of time. They were in negotiations for quite a while, and what they ended up getting out of it is everybody there earning a living wage now, and those important AI provisions and other positive gains in their contracts. So it's a difficult path sometimes when you have the situation like they had with the directors, when you have various sorts of situations where management is resistive, even abusive, even engaging in illegal activities that can fall under NLRB complaints. But the destination is one that's really positive for workers and ultimately, in some of these cases, for our own healthcare and our community.
This has been Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. Thanks for watching.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.